In the vast expanse of the rugged west, where the sun hung low over the horizon, casting shadows that danced across the parched earth, there lay a town of faded grandeur. The buildings, once proud, now leaned with the weight of forgotten dreams. Dust swirled in the air, settling on the wooden porches that creaked under the weight of idle gossip. At the center of this forsaken place stood Clara's homestead, weathered but resilient, much like the woman who resided within its walls. Thomas, a man worn by the harsh realities of frontier life, stood outside the saloon, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The distant mountains loomed, jagged against the sky, akin to the scars that marred Clara's skin. He had heard the whispers, the cautious glances exchanged between townsfolk when her name was mentioned. Yet beneath the surface of those imperfections lay a heart that pulsed with compassion, offering warmth to those fortunate enough to witness it. But for Thomas, the stories of her past were a weight that held him back, suffocating any desire he might have harbored. As he shifted his stance, the burr of a nearby wind carried with it a reminder of the burdens they both bore. Thomas's own scars, invisible yet deeply inscribed within his soul, colored his perceptions. A wounded pride, born of family loss and betrayal, fed his reluctance. He had seen men shun Clara, their laughter echoing harshly, a cruel refrain that haunted the corners of his mind. Yet he couldn't shake the image of her smile, the way her hands moved gracefully despite their history, planting seeds in her garden, coaxing life from the barren land. The townspeople, with their judgmental eyes, failed to see the beauty that lay beneath the surface. They couldn't fathom that Clara, with her gentle heart, was far more than the scars etched upon her skin. He watched her through the dusty window of the general store, where she exchanged pleasantries with the shopkeeper, her laughter soft, yet genuine. In that moment, Thomas felt the pull of longing, both for her spirit and the life he had long since shunned. It was a yearning that frightened him, a hope that risked shattering the fragile armor he'd built around himself. The evening sun dipped lower, bathing the town in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows that lingered like unspoken words. Thomas turned away from the store, his feet carrying him toward the dilapidated church that stood at the town's edge. With every step, he grappled with the weight of his own insecurities, the fear of being seen as another man who failed to embrace Clara's reality. Inside the church, the air was thick with dust and silence, and he sank into a pew, feeling the cool wood against his back. With each passing moment, he wrestled with his thoughts. In the stillness, amidst the ghosts of prayers whispered long ago, he realized the truth buried deep within him. The scars they both bore were not marks of shame, but rather testaments to perseverance. It was their shared struggles that might weave a connection strong enough to endure the judgment of a world that demanded perfection. As the last slivers of sunlight faded, he understood that perhaps beauty lay not in the absence of scars, but in the capacity to love, despite them. As twilight descended over the town, the air crackled with an undercurrent of change, as if the very earth sensed the arrival of something or someone unexpected. From behind the church, a figure emerged, cloaked in shadow. The outline was lean, its movements deliberate, as they traversed towards the saloon that had been the center of so many whispered conversations. The townsfolk, who had gathered on the porch, shifted uneasily, their laughter dying down as they took notice. The figure came into the light, revealing a man wore a weather-beaten duster, its fabric frayed at the edges, bearing witness to untold journeys. His hat was pulled low, obscuring much of his face, and a day's growth of beard spoke of rough times spent on the trail. Yet it was his eyes that captivated, sharp and discerning, reflecting a depth that hinted at a past full of weight and hardship. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as they recognized him, a newcomer, an enigma whose presence ignited the embers of curiosity mingled with mistrust. Thomas stood at the edge of the congregation, the heavy weight of conflicting emotions clinging to him. He observed how the man moved among them with ease, glancing from one face to another as if searching for something or someone. The townsfolk, ever the guardians of their own judgment, regarded him with a mix of disdain and intrigue, eager to dissect this stranger who dared to infiltrate their brittle community. Yet amidst their watchful eyes, Thomas felt a flicker of something else: kinship. Perhaps this stranger too was a wanderer burdened by scars of his own, seeking a place to belong. As the man neared Clara's homestead, Thomas's heart raced, not with envy, but with an inexplicable urge to shield her from the gaze that lingered too long on the imperfections that others condemned. He watched as the stranger paused, drawn by the glow of Clara's modest garden. Here was a woman who, despite the whispers, had cultivated beauty in a land of desolation. In her gentle labor, there existed a peace that seemed to beckon even the most weary of souls. The newcomer's eyes softened, and for a moment, the burdens of his journey fell away, revealing a glimmer of recognition, of resilience. Then Clara appeared at the door, silhouetted against the golden hue of her home. Her hair cascaded like a waterfall of sun-kissed wheat, framing her face, highlighting the scars that told tales of survival. The man's attention shifted entirely, and the townsfolk held their collective breath, waiting for the moment that laughter, kindness, might either bridge the chasm or exacerbate the divide. But the stranger showed neither disdain nor pity. Instead, he seemed to understand, perhaps even appreciate, the strength that existed in every mark upon her skin. Thomas felt a pang of something sharp and undefined. Was it jealousy, or was it hope? Could it be that this man sought camaraderie rather than condemnation? As Clara stepped forward, a hesitant smile played on her lips, the kind that brightened the dusk, but could not erase the weight of her past. The world around them faded, the noise of the town dissolving into a quiet murmur, leaving only the two figures standing at the threshold of connection. Thomas remained rooted in place, caught in the silence of his own uncertainty, as the twilight deepened, wrapping them all in shadows embroidered with silent promises and unspoken fears. As the twilight thickened, Clara's silhouette drew the stranger closer, as if her very presence defied the shadows of judgment that clung to her like a second skin. The warm light spilling from the homestead bathed her in a soft glow, accentuating the confidence with which she stood. Though the townsfolk had long dismissed her due to her scars, she emanated a quiet dignity that seemed to resonate with the newcomer. For a moment, the world outside faded, and the air between them held an electric tension, laden with the weight of unspoken understanding. The stranger took a hesitant step forward, and the porch boards creaked beneath him, a sound so ordinary, yet charged with significance. The townsfolk, eyes wide and breath held, considered this an act of rebellion against the unspoken laws of their community. His hand reached up, removing the brim of his hat, revealing eyes that held an unyielding kindness, one that pierced through the layers of callousness that shrouded the town. Clara's heart quickened, caught off guard by the sudden openness, yet she stood steadfast, a silent mix of curiosity and caution flooding her veins. Then, with a sincerity that seemed to momentarily dispel the tension, he spoke, words low and earnest. "Your garden is thriving." It was a simple observation, reminiscent of the countless stolen glances she had shared with the earth she nurtured. But those words were imbued with a weight that echoed louder than any judgment hurled her way. As he stepped closer, she felt her defenses soften, the invisible walls she had built to shield her spirit beginning to crumble under the warmth of his presence. For a fleeting instant, the onlookers shifted uneasily, the power of their disdain waning in the face of genuine compassion. The newcomer lifted a hand, extending it toward one of the vibrant blooms that swayed gently in the evening breeze. "These flowers," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "they speak of survival, of hope." Clara felt her breath catch, the honesty of his words enveloping her like a comforting embrace. In that moment, the distance between them shrank, swallowed by a shared recognition of resilience that transcended their individual scars. As the crowd regarded the scene with wary fascination, Thomas stood at the fringes, his heart racing with a tumult of emotions, fear, hope, and an unsettling envy. He watched Clara shake her head ever so slightly, a gesture of humble denial. Yet, as his gaze fell on the stranger, he saw something unexpected. There was no ridicule in his eyes, only admiration. The new man turned slightly, as if sensing Thomas's presence, their gazes locking for the briefest moment. It was as if they shared a silent acknowledgement of the courage it took to stand before Clara, to confront the judgments that had defined their town for far too long. The air thickened with unsaid words and palpable tension as Clara straightened, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. She stepped closer, tilting her head ever so slightly to meet the stranger's eyes. The townsfolk, caught off guard by her movement, collectively held their breath, the reality of the moment sinking in. Clara reached out, gently brushing her fingers against the petals he had admired, as if offering him a piece of her spirit, a testament to the beauty that thrived within her regardless of the scars. In that quiet exchange, a shift occurred, a ripple of compassion that cut through the din of judgment. The weight of the past, of a town not ready to embrace imperfection, began to lift. In the fading light, a bridge emerged between Clara and the stranger, forged by understanding, not by appearance. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon, bathing the world in deepening shadows, hope flickered alive, igniting the possibility of connection in a place long marred by disdain. The soft murmur of the townsfolk faded into a tense hush, as if the very air around Clara and the stranger had thickened with the weight of unspoken expectations. Clara, standing firm with her head held high, felt the swell of uncertainty ripple through her. She had long learned to navigate the world's disdain, but the newcomer's presence drew something deeper from within, a flicker of vulnerability she had buried beneath the scars of her past. A knot formed in her throat, and her breath quickened as his gaze remained steady, unwavering and unjudging. The stranger's eyes were like twin pools, reflecting a resilience that stirred something within her. Clara felt the warmth of his sincerity without needing to hear another word. It was in the way he listened, his focus unwavering, as if she were the only thing that mattered in that moment. It reminded her of the flowers she nurtured, fragile yet defiant against the harshest sun. She had tended to them, coaxing life from earth worn thin, and yet here was a man who seemed to understand the beauty of her struggle without the need for acknowledgement of its source. As Thomas stood aside, rooted with a mix of jealousy and apprehension, he grappled with the stirring of emotions he had long kept at bay. He watched as Clara's expressions shifted, an openness blooming, the shadows of her past momentarily receding. It was a sight that pained him yet filled him with an insatiable longing. What right did he have to yearn for her when he had allowed the judgments of others to control his heart? The very essence of her spirit tugged at him. And yet he felt the spectre of his own scars, the weight of family betrayal, and the fear of being perceived as just another man willing to abandon her to the disparagement of their town. Behind the saloon, the sun continued its descent, casting elongated shadows that stretched like the distance between Thomas and Clara. He felt as though he were watching a mural come to life, a narrative painted against the backdrop of the town that had long deemed Clara unworthy. For years, he had played the silent observer, witnessing the harshness with which others treated her, shielding himself in the armor of indifference. And now, this stranger threatened to dismantle that facade. The knowledge gnawed at him. You don't get to want her when you've done nothing to stand beside her. The silence was almost deafening now, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the whisper of the evening breeze. Clara's heart raced as she took a step closer to the stranger, her resolve strengthening in the face of shared understanding. The way he regarded her, his eyes brightening with the recognition of her courage, unmasked the beauty she had so often hidden in shadows. She felt the fragility of her defenses begin to crumble, the vulnerability of wanting to be seen for more than her scars, urging her forward. With a flicker of determination, Clara offered a tentative smile, a small act of defiance against the judgments that had laid heavy upon her. The stranger responded with a gentle nod, as if inviting her to step beyond the limits imposed by the world around them. The unspoken promise hung between them, a delicate thread that tethered them to the possibility of connection, a shared acknowledgement that perhaps beauty lay in the very imperfections that made them human. As the last sliver of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting the town in velvety shadows, Thomas felt a surge of urgency coursing through him. The stranger's presence shifted the air, drawing Clara into a moment of recognition she so deserved. Thomas's hands clenched at his sides, grappling with the threat of losing her to a man who could face the world without flinching. The flicker of hope that had stirred within him now felt like a storm brewing. A tempest of emotions caught between the longing for connection and the unwillingness to confront his own fears. In the depths of night, the echoes of the town's disdain lingered, mingling with the promise of something new, something yet to be discovered in the shadows. As twilight wrapped the town in a shroud of deepening shadows, a tangible silence hung in the air, thick with anticipation. Clara stood before the stranger, her heart beating a hesitant rhythm that echoed the doubts swirling in her mind. Each breath felt like a fragile promise, a chance to reclaim herself from the confines of disdain that had shackled her for so long. The church's steeple loomed in the background, a stark reminder of the faith communities often placed in appearances. Yet here, before this man, she felt an unfamiliar pulse of hope. The stranger took another step towards her, his gaze unwavering and gentle, as if he could see the soul beneath her scars. That simple, sincere look pulled at Clara's defenses, compelling her to step forward into the light that spilled from her homestead. The warmth radiating from the frail blooms in her garden spoke of the resilience she had nurtured within, and as she caught a glimpse of herself reflected in his eyes, she felt a flicker of recognition, the acknowledgement of a kindred spirit who understood the hidden battles each scar represented. "Thank you for noticing them," Clara whispered, her voice scarcely breaking the stillness of the night. The words felt foreign, a melody sung softly into the wind. She gestured toward the blooms swaying in the gentle breeze, a bouquet of colors brightening the fading light surrounding them. It's easier to see the imperfections, the things we often keep hidden. In that moment, her vulnerability radiated outward, creating a space in which her fears could coalesce with the tentative connection growing between them. His eyes softened further, understanding radiating from him like the glow of the setting sun. "If they blazed across my skin, I would wear them with pride," he replied, the gravel in his voice a soothing balm against her insecurities. The sincerity in his words enveloped Clara, wrapping her in a comforting embrace that erased the ridicule that had often accompanied her scars. She felt the corners of her mouth lift, a smile breaking free as the burdens tethered to her heart began to lift, if only for a moment. But from the shadows of the saloon, Thomas stood resolute, the sight of Clara's fragile laughter igniting a firestorm within him. He had admired her from the edges of existence, witnessing the way she transformed desolation into beauty. Yet, witnessing the vulnerability shared between her and the newcomer felt like walking on the edge of a precipice, a fear of falling into the depths of despair if she chose to embrace this new bond. Clenching his fists, he wrestled with the realization that he had hidden from her, from the possibility of being the one to see her heart as she deserved. The ache of longing mixed with jealousy threatened to consume him. Clara, lost in the moment, took a step closer to the stranger, emboldened by his kindness. She felt a sense of liberation unfurling within her, each shared breath a testament to the strength she had cultivated amidst judgment. Here was a man who sought connection over condemnation, opening a door to a world where scars could be celebrated as symbols of resilience. The air thickened with unspoken possibilities, a bridge crafted from mutual acknowledgement that swayed gently between them, cradled in the twilight, but as the remnants of daylight vanished, plunging the world into darkness, the weight of the moment pressed heavily upon Thomas. He fought the impulse to intervene, to bring Clara back to the familiar comforts of their shared solitude. Yet in the depths of his heart, he wrestled with the truth. Nobody wanted to be the husband of the woman with scars until they understood the depth of her gentle heart. The shadows around him whispered of regret, of love unspoken, as he remained caught within the grasp of his own fears, longing for the strength to step into the light alongside Clara instead of remaining hidden in the folds of darkness. As Clara took a step closer to the stranger, the air around them seemed to thrum with an electric tension, a palpable shift that both intrigued and frightened those watching from the edges of the saloon. The townsfolk, their faces a tapestry of skepticism and curiosity, held their breaths, unsure whether to break the moment with whispers or allow it to unfurl. For Clara, this was a breath of fresh air in a town suffocated by judgment, a chance to embrace her scars instead of hiding them. Yet there lingered the weight of hesitation, that familiar notion of fear that often accompanied connection, especially when it bore risk. The stranger, sensing her vulnerability, took a definitive step forward, fully crossing the threshold into her garden, as if it were a sacred space. It was a transformative gesture that spoke louder than words, a quiet act of defiance against the town's cruel whispers. He knelt before the bright blooms, white and yellow petals trembling as he reached out, fingers grazing their delicate surfaces. "You have turned this place into a sanctuary," he said softly, his voice imbued with respect. "These flowers are not just decorations, they are testaments to your strength." Clara felt the warmth of his gaze enveloping her like the sun, breaking through grey clouds, an affirmation that she had not often received. She stood frozen, bewildered by the sincerity in his eyes, as if he were inviting her into a world where her imperfections were not only accepted, but celebrated. The weight of judgment from the townsfolk began to dissipate like mist in the morning light. She watched as he plucked a single bloom, holding it delicately in his hand, a gesture so simple and yet infinitely profound. With careful deliberation, he rose and turned to her, extending the flower as if it were a precious relic. "I want you to know you are not alone," he murmured, the sincerity of his words enveloping them both like a comforting embrace. In that moment, Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of disbelief and warmth flooding her heart. The flower he offered was more than a token. It was a bridge, a testament to their shared understanding, a quiet vow that perhaps beauty lay not only in the flowers, but also in the scars that shaped them both. As she accepted the bloom, Clara's fingers brushed against his, a fleeting connection that ignited an undeniable spark. The air around them felt charged with possibility, the dimming light around them giving way to a profound understanding of what it meant to embrace one another's truths. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara allowed herself to be seen, not just as a woman abandoned by the world for her scars, but as someone worthy of connection, of kindness, and of hope. Thomas, watching from the periphery, felt the ground shift beneath him. The way Clara's demeanor changed, her posture softening as she accepted the flower, rendered him momentarily motionless. The newcomer's simple gesture, so pure and genuine, illuminated the divide between him and Clara, the unspoken walls he had allowed to build around his heart. The ache of longing intertwined with a choking dread at the realization of his own shortcomings. He had stood by, silent and dormant, while a stranger dared to acknowledge the resilience in Clara that he had failed to truly see. In that instant, he understood that the battle for her heart rested not just on words spoken, but also on the courage it took to step into the light. In the fading twilight, Clara's heart beat, with the soft rhythm of renewed hope. She could feel the judgment of the townsfolk pressing in around them, yet in the face of the stranger's recognition, it faded into the background. Here was a man who saw past her scars, who acknowledged the beauty of her struggle, and who offered her a flower as a symbol of that understanding. It was a moment of transformation, not just for her, but for all who dared to witness it. The scene hung suspended in time, the evening air embracing them as Clara took a deep breath, the scent of earth and blossoms mingling with the promise of something new. She could feel the bloom resting in her palm, a reminder that perhaps acceptance was possible, and connection wasn't just a chance taken, but a leap of faith worth embracing. As Clara looked into the eyes of the stranger, she felt the weight of her past lift, forging a path illuminated by the glow of newfound resilience. As the darkness settled over the town, Thomas felt an ache deeper than the evening chill. It resonated within him like an echo of past regrets. He watched Clara lift the flower, her fingers curling around its delicate stem, a movement so tender it seemed to breathe life into the air, thick with unspoken judgments. Beneath the burden of that moment, memories rushed back, shadows of laughter and warmth fractured by the sharp edges of bitterness and loss. It was a time when Thomas himself had stood on the precipice of love, yet had turned away, afraid of the scars that would forever mar their connection. Years ago, he had loved a woman in a town, not unlike this one, a bright spirit with dreams woven into the fabric of her being. She had a laugh that could dissolve the most stubborn of clouds, and in her eyes, Thomas had seen a future painted in colors, vibrant and alive. But fate had twisted its cruel fingers, and as whispers spread like wildfire, rumors sullied her name, exposing truths better left hidden. When the town's disdain turned sharp as arrows, he had faltered, unable to shield her from the storm of public judgment. The weight of that betrayal settled on his shoulders now, a relentless reminder that fear could silence even the purest intentions. In the silence that enveloped him, Thomas recalled the way love had flickered and died in that ember of a moment. How he had stood on the sidelines, unable to confront the judgment of others, as his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The day they had parted, he could still hear her voice trailing behind him, a mix of confusion and hurt, echoing through his mind like a haunting melody. "You were supposed to protect me," she had cried, and he had felt the sting of her truth cut deeper than any scar. He had allowed fear to dictate his actions, and now he grappled with the specter of guilt that loomed large over every decision he faced. Now, seeing Clara caught in the luminous glow of acceptance, he felt a surge of recognition wash over him. This moment mirrored his past, but bore the promise of redemption, an opportunity to stand firm against the tide of disdain, to be the man he once wished he could have been. Yet the ghost of his past still held him captive, wrapping its cold fingers around his heart as he turned his gaze back toward the fragile connection developing between Clara and the stranger. Each smile, every soft word shared between them felt like a challenge to the shadows he had allowed to dictate his life. Could he risk stepping into the light again, risking his heart in a world that thrived on judgments? His thoughts spiraled as Clara's laughter danced in the air, the sound breaking through the fog enveloping him. The stranger knelt before her, momentarily keeping the dark past at bay, yet Thomas felt the shadows creeping in. He watched as Clara's smile grew brighter, her spirit awakening in the presence of someone willing to see her for who she truly was. Time unfurled like an endless landscape before him, and he was forced to confront the reality of his choices, the pain of looking away and the fear of opening his heart once more. A swell of resolve began to stir within him. Perhaps this was his chance to alter the course of fate that had run so awry before. He felt the weight of his past settle on his shoulders. But no longer would he allow it to dictate his future. With a deep breath, Thomas stepped forward, feeling the cool wind brush against his face, invigorating him with purpose. The air shimmered with a promise of connection. And as the stranger's presence remained steady, he conjured the courage that had eluded him for far too long. Clara deserved more than what he had given her, and this time he would not stand by silently, nor would he allow the shadows to consume him. The twilight deepened, wrapping the town in a blanket of shadows, while Clara felt the weight of the stranger's gaze hold her captive. The flower rested delicately in her palm, its vibrant petals a stark contrast to the muted tones of dusk surrounding them. As the stranger smiled, the warmth in his eyes ignited a tender flicker of hope deep within her, a feeling she had thought long extinguished beneath the judgments of a town that saw only her scars. But the flicker was quickly met with a gust of anxiety, for the very openness that drew her to him also threatened to expose the raw vulnerabilities she had guarded so fiercely. Just as the moment swelled with promise, a wave of uncertainty flared within her. What if he turned away from her when the reality of her past settled like dust in the air? Memories of the laughter and the whispered disdain of townsfolk echoed in her mind, drowning out the gentle warmth offered by the stranger. In an instant, the oasis of comfort he had opened began to feel like a mirage. Clara took an involuntary step back, her heart racing as the laughter of those nearby began to creep back into focus, mingling with her own unrelenting fears. She risked a glance toward the townsfolk, their eyes glimmering with a mix of curiosity and disdain, and her heart sank. Would he, too, see only the imperfections that marred her skin? Meanwhile, Thomas felt the tumult of emotions warring inside him as he observed Clara retreating, her radiant smile dimming beneath the weight of unspoken fears. He felt a pang of urgency pulsing through him, a primal instinct to shield her from the gaze of the stranger who now stood so close, yet seemed to draw a line through the fragile tapestry of connection they had begun to weave. The memory of Clara's laughter, bright and free in the garden, contrasted sharply with the silence that now hung heavy, threatening to drown them both. Thomas clutched the threshold of the saloon, torn between the urge to rush forward and the fear of disrupting the moment that had just begun. The stranger, sensing the shift in Clara's demeanor, felt the atmosphere grow heavy around them, mingling confusion with his desire to connect. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he murmured, his expression softening, seeking to bridge the widening gap. But as his words floated into the night, they fractured against the walls Clara had built. Rising high and impenetrable, she met his eyes. A flash of uncertainty mirrored back at her. The kindness she saw flickered like the fading light, and she found herself caught between wanting to embrace the warmth of his acknowledgement and fearing the vulnerabilities it would unleash. "What are you doing here?" Clara found her voice, but it emerged laced with tension, the words spilling out before she could rein them in. The question held an edge, betraying her deep-rooted fears. There it was, the challenge she had been fighting all along. The risk of truly being seen, the acceptance of being loved for all that she was, not just the scars, but everything woven within them. The moment hung suspended, both a plea for reassurance and a test of the stranger's earnestness. She felt her heart thud painfully in her chest as her defenses rose, an instinctive armor against rejection. "I didn't mean any harm," he said again, and his voice held a weight of sincerity that wrapped around her like the cool night air. But it felt hollow against Clara's fears. She had seen men flicker their interest only to withdraw at the first sign of her past. "You—" She hesitated, her thoughts swirling with the bitter echoes of judgment she had faced. "You don't know me." The shadows deepened around her, and her voice faltered at the edges, a whisper of doubt clawing at her resolve. The silence stretched, a chasm that threatened to swallow them both, leaving behind remnants of what could have been. As they stood connected yet worlds apart, Thomas felt a storm of emotions surge within him. He could see the stranger faltering under the weight of Clara's mistrust, and the flicker of hope he had felt just moments ago was threatened by the reality that sat before them. He took a step forward, his voice steady but low. "Clara, he does see you." But the words felt inadequate, hanging in the air like an echo swallowed by the night. The fissure between them deepened, threatening to sever the delicate thread of connection, and Thomas grappled with the realization that this moment might slip through his fingers before he could grasp it fully. The air crackled with tension, thick with the weight of Clara's mistrust and the stranger's genuine intent. Thomas felt the moment stretch like the shadows that loomed around them, dark and foreboding, where the murmurs of townsfolk grew louder, feeding into the unease that had settled like smoke in the night. He could see it in Clara's eyes, the flicker of fear that flared upon the stranger's admission. Unsure of the outcome, Thomas wrestled with the urge to step forward, to shield her from the weight of judgment that was poised to strike. But then, as if summoning the very embodiment of disdain, a group of men emerged from the saloon, laughter spilling forth like arrows aimed at their vulnerability. Their voices, brash and mocking, pierced the fragile moment, sending ripples of discomfort through the gathering. "What do we have here? Is this the Newtown darling, or just another fool blinded by a pretty face?" One man sneered, laughter echoing cruelly in the night air. The tension snapped, igniting a wildfire of judgment that spread through the crowd like gasoline on dry grass, threatening to engulf the connection that had just begun to bloom between Clara and the stranger. Clara flinched, the barbed words striking deep, dredging up the insecurities she had carried like stones in her pockets. She turned slightly away, instinctively shielding herself from the hurtful gaze of the crowd, her heart racing as she felt the collective judgment pouring onto her like a torrential rain. The laughter wrapped around her, suffocating and disorienting, as she grappled with the harsh reality that echoed louder than the softness of the stranger's kind gaze. The world felt small and unforgiving, a prison of scorn where scabs of her past reopened painfully and relentlessly. The stranger, witnessing the shift in her expression, moved instinctively between Clara and the jeering men, his frame solid and unwavering. "Leave her be," he said sharply, the assertiveness of his tone a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. It was an act that spoke of courage, but the air crackled with the threat of a confrontation that could spiral out of control at any moment. The murmurs of the townsfolk grew louder, some whispering in delight at the brewing conflict, while others leaned in, eager to watch the clash unfold. Thomas felt his heart race, the precariousness of the moment threatening to spiral beyond what he could fathom. But Clara's strength, though hidden beneath layers of doubt, ignited at the stranger's defense. She felt her own pulse quicken in response to his boldness, a flicker of admiration stirring within her, a realization that she was not alone in this moment. "No, it's all right," she whispered, her voice barely breaking through the growing tension as she stepped forward, reclaiming her space. The darkness that had hovered around her began to dissipate as she faced the jeering men with an assurance that surprised even her, as if she had finally embraced the scars she had long concealed. Yet before she could fully find her footing, one of the men, emboldened by the crowd's energy, stepped closer, a sneer curling on his lips. "Look at her. Think she can stand against us? Just a woman with scars," he taunted, the laughter in his voice laced with venom. The words dripped like poison, and Thomas felt a surge of anger rise within him. A fierce protectiveness ignited as he recognized the deep-rooted disdain that had suffocated Clara for far too long. It was time to shatter the walls of judgment, not just for Clara, but for himself too. In that charged moment, with the crowd's jeers mingling with the cool night air, Thomas saw the raw strength flickering within Clara's eyes, a determination to rise above the weight of public scorn. The stranger stood shoulder to shoulder with her, a testament to solidarity that began to forge the bonds of resilience between them. As the laughter echoed into the darkness, Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady as he joined the fray. "Maybe it's time you learned that scars don't define us. They tell a story of strength you'll never understand." He was ready to fight, to challenge the disdain, knowing that the battle was more than just for Clara. It was a fight to reclaim humanity from judgment itself. The air buzzed with the intensity of the moment, the stakes rising as shadows deepened, challenging the hearts of those present to embrace a truth that had long been buried. The laughter of the townsfolk reverberated through the air, sharp and unforgiving. Yet Clara stood firm, emboldened by the presence of the stranger at her side. Thomas felt his heart race as he watched her face, a mixture of vulnerability and defiance playing across her features. The sharp words hurled her way, now bounced off the invisible armor she had begun to don in that moment. Clara's chin tilted slightly upward, a soft glimmer of resolve sparking in her eyes beneath the flickering lantern light. She exchanged a brief glance with the stranger, a silent bond forming between them, an unspoken agreement that they would not be defined by the judgments of others. Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of regret heavy in his chest, almost suffocating as he felt the distance between himself and Clara widen in the face of yet another brutal confrontation. They had shared countless moments in silence, two souls quietly navigating a world that often felt so hostile, yet here was an opportunity, an opening he could seize to step back into the light alongside her. As Clara raised her voice, the resolve swelling within her, Thomas realized that she was ready to stand against the tide of scorn, and in that he felt a twinge of pride. He yearned to step towards her, to provide a shield against the barbs that flew their way. The stranger stood unwavering, a pillar of support beside her, his presence radiating a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the hostility of the men surrounding them. In that charged moment, she felt the warmth of solidarity enveloping her. The flicker of admiration blossomed within as she noticed how he did not flinch, but rather stood his ground, eyes locked on the men as if daring them to take a step closer. This was not merely a defense, it was a declaration that her scars were not weapons to be wielded against her, but badges she wore with pride. Clara took a deep breath, a steadying moment that kissed the vulnerability threatening to fracture her newfound courage. Thomas clenched his fists, feeling the tension tighten like a noose around him. The unfamiliar strength that Clara harnessed sparked something within him, urging him to shake off the shadows that had haunted him for too long. He could not remain a bystander any longer. With each jeer from the crowd, the urgency pulsed stronger, intertwining his resolve with Clara's. He could see it, a chance to weave himself back into her life, to fortify the fragile connection that now stood on the precipice of judgment. But as he took a step forward, he felt the tug of uncertainty again, the fear of stumbling into the very chasm that had held him captive. Caught in the haze of the moment, Clara turned slightly, her breath hitching as she met Thomas's gaze from afar. In that instant, something shifted. Her eyes, once filled with trepidation, sparkled with the warmth of shared understanding, and the weight of his past regrets began to dissolve, if only for a fleeting heartbeat. She wore her scars like a crown of resilience, and even in that tempest of disdain swirling around them, Clara stood tall. For a moment, they were not defined by the judgments of others. Rather, they were two souls intertwined, holding steadfast to one another in the face of adversity. She felt his presence beside her, as if an anchor amid the storm. The crowd's jeers faded into a dull roar, replaced by the silent loyalty that hung between them. Clara lifted her chin higher, her heart swelling with a newfound determination that wrapped around her like a cloak. This was not merely about her scars. This was about embracing the woman she had become through the trials of her past, a woman who deserved to be seen and respected. The stranger's unwavering gaze held hers, a mirror reflecting the resilience she had cultivated in the depths of her journey. Together, they stood against the tide, a united front against the scorn that threatened to drown them. As the laughter swirled around them, thick with disdain, Thomas felt the spark ignite, a flame of hope illuminating the shadows that had long haunted his heart. He took another step forward, whispers of courage beckoning him to embrace the vulnerability before him, an invitation to be more than he had ever allowed himself to be. Clara, standing alongside the stranger, embodied a strength he had not fully recognized in her until now. Their eyes met, an unspoken promise flickering between them, and in that moment he understood. Nobody wanted to be the husband of the woman with scars until they embraced the beauty of her gentle heart. Together, they would confront the world, the silent loyalty between them, a beacon of resilience against the storm. As the taunts from the crowd echoed around them, Clara felt the weight of memories pressing against her chest, threatening to unleash a torrent of vulnerability she had fought to contain. Each jeer resonated with the whispers of her past, fragments of a life once vibrant, now shrouded in shadows of judgment. The scars that adorned her skin were not merely marks of survival. They were remnants of laughter stolen, of love turned away, and dreams cast aside in the face of unyielding disdain. Yet, in that moment, standing beside the stranger, warmth unfurled within her, a flicker of recognition igniting the embers of her spirit. The men's laughter faded into a distant hum as Clara's focus shifted, landing on the steadfast presence at her side. The stranger's unwavering gaze, clear and kind, anchored her amidst the tempest. He did not see her as others did. He saw the deep-rooted strength that had blossomed from her scars, a beauty that transcended the superficial judgments of the narrow-minded townsfolk. She felt an unfamiliar stir of hope burgeoning within her, a willingness to embrace the woman she had fought so hard to become. Their connection, forged in the flames of resilience, radiated a warmth that began to dispel the chill of the crowd's disdain. Across the distance, Thomas wrestled with the weight of Clara's strength displayed before him. Memories of his past, the woman he had allowed to slip away, coiled around him like a shroud. Her laughter had been a melody that danced through the corners of his heart, yet he had let fear dictate his actions, stifling the love he had held for her. Now, witnessing Clara stand resolute against the harsh judgment of their community, he felt an ache blossom deep within him, an understanding that the path of vulnerability was fraught with danger, yet held the promise of beauty. He was reminded of what it meant to truly see someone, not as they appeared, but as they were in the deep recesses of their being. As the stranger moved slightly, positioning himself in front of Clara, Thomas felt a surge of admiration for the man who dared to stand in the face of contempt. There was an authenticity in the way he regarded Clara, an appreciation that shone through his steadfastness. In that moment, he understood that this wasn't merely a standoff between two men. It was a challenge to the very fabric of their town's misguided values. The tension was palpable, a charged energy that crackled through the air like static before a storm. Thomas clenched his fists, battling the urge to rush towards them, to fend off the darkness that had lingered too long over Clara's heart. But Clara's voice cut through the tension, rising above the jeering men. "You think my scars make me weak? You're wrong." Her words were imbued with a quiet ferocity that demanded silence from the onlookers. The power of her statement held them captive, rendering judgment momentarily mute. Clara took a step forward, a defiant spark igniting within her, weaving the threads of her narrative into a tapestry of courage. In that crystalline moment of exposure, she drew from the depths of her heart the pain, the struggles, the moments of isolation and despair, transforming them into a tapestry of strength that refused to be dismissed. Thomas watched, entranced by the strength radiating from Clara, proud yet painfully aware of his past failures. She stood there, unyielding, a testament to the resilience he had once admired in another woman, a woman he had failed to protect. It struck him then that perhaps the time for his own awakening had come. He could not remain a ghost in her life, tethered to shadows that whispered of regret. As Clara's words resonated through the silent crowd, he felt the first flicker of resolve awaken deep in his heart. No longer would he stand idly by. It was time to forge a new path, to reclaim the beauty of vulnerability that had eluded him for far too long. The moment called for action, not just for himself, but for Clara. a chance to embrace the weight of the scars they both carried and transform it into a bond that defied judgment's cruel grip. As the night deepened around them, the stars flickered to life, standing as silent witnesses to the unfolding truth. Clara's voice, steady and fierce, wove through the air, crafting a new narrative, one that would rise from the ashes of disdain and reclaim her rightful place in the eyes of those who had dared to judge. In that pivotal moment, surrounded by a crowd that had long belittled her, she became a symbol of resilience, the blooming flower amid the desolation. Standing at the precipice of change, she inspired not only herself but also Thomas, who felt the resolute stirrings of courage woven through the fabric of their shared struggles. The shadows that had loomed over their pasts began to fade, replaced by the promise of connection, compassion, and a future where scars would no longer be feared but embraced as testaments to their journeys. The night deepened, thickening the shadows that clung to the wooden buildings like memories refusing to be forgotten. Clara stood her ground, the flower still cradled in her palm as she faced the jeering men, a defiant spirit amidst a gathering storm. The stranger's presence at her side anchored her, his unwavering gaze providing a sanctuary from the harshness of the world. But as the vitriol continued to swirl around them, a dark undertow began to emerge, pulling at the seams of their fragile connection. Thomas, caught in the tension, felt the looming threat of repercussions ripple through the air, a nagging fear that this moment of courage might ignite a firestorm they could not contain. The ringleader of the men stepped forward, a sneer curling on his lips, eyes glinting with malice. "So, you think you're something special, huh? Just because he's playing the gallant knight to the scarred damsel?" His words sliced through the air, dripping with disdain, and Clara felt a tightening in her chest, a deep-seated fear that threatened to undo the resolve she had just found. The stranger's grip on her shoulder tightened, but she sensed a flicker of hesitation in his stance, as if the weight of her past was suddenly too much for him to bear. "No one here wants you," the man continued, voice rising in a crescendo of mockery. "Not him, definitely not me. Look at you, damaged goods, just like the rest of us. You think a flower can cover that up?" With each word, he painted a portrait of Clara that was filled with the harsh strokes of judgment. It felt as if the night air itself closed in around her, threatening to suffocate the fragile hope she had begun to cling to just moments before. Her heart raced, the laughter of the townsfolk mingling with the echo of her insecurities, creating a cacophony that drowned out her newfound strength. Yet, as the crowd swelled with laughter, Thomas felt an insistent tide rising within him, a need to protect, to stand by her when the world sought to tear her down. The fear flickered like a dying ember, igniting a spark of courage he could no longer ignore. He stepped forward, the distance between him and Clara shrinking until they were mere inches apart. "You don't know her," he said, voice steady, deep. "You've only ever seen the surface and never the heart that beats beneath it." The words felt heavy, laden with the weight of all he had held back, as if they could shift the tide of disdain threatening to drown them both. But Clara remained silent, caught in the swell of emotions rising within her. The stranger's hand rested on her shoulder, a balm against the venom that surrounded them. Yet she felt the pain of vulnerability claw at her chest, threatening to unravel her newfound resolve. She turned to Thomas, searching his eyes for understanding. But the flicker of uncertainty she had seen moments ago was gone, replaced by a fierce determination. Yet she couldn't help but wonder, would he remain steadfast in the face of this onslaught, or would he falter like so many others who had come and gone from her life? As the laughter began to die down, giving way to a taut silence, Clara drew a deep breath, steadying herself amid the chaos. She looked from Thomas to the stranger and back again, feeling the pulse of their shared bond thrum beneath the surface, a connection forged in the fires of judgment, yet tempered by compassion. With her heart racing, she stepped forward, bridging the gap, her voice cutting through the tension that hung thick in the air like dust. "You're right," she declared, unwavering. "I'm scarred, but those scars tell the story of my survival. They don't define me anymore." She felt the strength rise within her, blossoming like the flowers in her garden, vibrant and alive, daring the darkness to confront their resilience head-on. As silence enveloped them, the townsfolk absorbed her words, the weight of Clara's strength hanging in the air like a promise, a testament to the spirit of enduring beauty that lay beneath the surface. The stranger's hand tightened around hers, while Thomas, still standing beside her, felt the cracks of his own armor begin to splinter. Clara was choosing to rise above the disdain, and in that moment he realized the true test was not merely the judgment of the townsfolk, but the depths of his commitment to stand alongside her, to fight against the tide of scorn that had followed her for far too long. The night was still, the bond between them challenged yet unyielding, destined to thrive in a world rife with judgment, where love could thrive amid the scars. The laughter from the crowd hung in the air like an unwanted spectre, echoing the cruel judgments that had shaped Clara's existence. But as she stood, defiantly unyielding, the petals of her heart began to unfold amidst the harshness. Thomas, rooted beside her, felt the rippling energy of her courage wash over him, a tide of warmth and strength that beckoned him to embrace the moment. The laughter seemed to fade away, replaced by an unexpected clarity. This was not merely a battle for Clara's dignity, but a reckoning with his own. Clara, emboldened, sensed the weight of their shared silence, the town holding its breath as she stepped further into the light. "I may be marked by my past," she spoke, her voice steady, "but those marks tell a story of survival." The crowd shifted uneasily, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. In that moment, she embodied the very essence of resilience, refusing to yield to the fear and loathing that had defined her for too long. The stranger's hand remained firm on her shoulder, a silent affirmation of solidarity that anchored her in the storm of judgment, while Thomas felt the pull of her bravery, urging him to step forward into the light alongside her. In the silence that followed her declaration, the jeers from the townsfolk dulled, unable to pierce the cocoon of strength she had woven around herself. Clara met the gaze of those who had once mocked her, holding their stares with a fierce resolve that radiated dignity. The scars that had so often defined her felt lighter, transformed into symbols of her journey, a journey that had led her here, to this moment, where she could reclaim her narrative. The petals of anguish she had clung to began to unfurl, revealing the flower of her spirit, vibrant and alive. Thomas felt the stirrings of warmth within him as Clara's strength took center stage, igniting something deep that had lain dormant for far too long. He watched her metamorphose from a woman burdened by disdain into a figure of unyielding courage. He longed to be the man who stood beside her, who bore witness to her beauty, her resilience, and the gentle heart that pulsed with life beneath the scars. He felt the challenge rising within himself, a call to action fueled by the realization that nobody wanted to be the husband of a woman with scars until they could fully embrace the gentleness entwined within her essence. With a newfound determination, Thomas stepped close to Clara, his presence a solid foundation that spoke volumes without words. "You are so much more than what they see," he declared, the sincerity in his voice reverberating through the crowd, cutting through the veil of disdain that had long held sway over their town. The shifting looks among the townsfolk began to reveal a growing awareness, nudging their hearts to reconsider the stories they had clung to for so long. Thomas felt the weight of the past lift slightly, a shimmering thread of hope weaving through his consciousness as he recognized the beauty of standing beside Clara, embracing her journey alongside her. In that moment of emotional resolution, it became clear to both Clara and Thomas that the scars would no longer shackle them to a past riddled with judgment. Instead, they would stand as beacons of resilience, torchbearers lighting the way for others who had felt the sting of public disdain. As Clara turned to Thomas, their eyes met, and a silent understanding blossomed between them, a vow to face the world together, to weave their stories into a tapestry that defied the limitations imposed by appearances and judgment. As the townsfolk began to shift their perceptions, the air grew thick with an unspoken recognition of shared humanity. Clara stood tall, the weight of burdens past lifted, not just by her own courage, but by the strength of the bond she shared with those around her. The healing began, the scars no longer just reminders of pain, but affirmations of the dignity they had fought to reclaim. In that moment, amid the shadows and laughter transformed into whispers of respect, Clara found her heart aligned with Thomas, standing together as a testament that beauty lay not in the absence of scars, but in the willingness to embrace the gentle heart that thrived despite them. As the laughter dissipated into hesitant whispers, the atmosphere shifted, the tension that had once enveloped Clara and the stranger giving way to a burgeoning sense of hope. The townsfolk, momentarily spellbound by Clara's defiance, began to re-evaluate the narratives they had spun around her. The edge of disdain softened as they witnessed her emerge from the shadows, vibrant and alive, a flower resilient against the harshest elements. Thomas felt the weight of their shared past lifting, weighing less with each passing moment, and in that brightness he saw the possibility of a future unshackled by judgment. Clara stood in the glow of the lantern light, her heart steadying as the embers of courage flickered within her. She caught sight of Thomas beside her, his steady gaze a grounding force that seemed to breathe life into the space around them. With every breath she took, she felt the remnants of fear wane, replaced by a resolve that coursed through her veins. The stranger's hand remained on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond. Yet it was Thomas's presence that held the most weight, a reminder that she was never truly alone in this fight. As whispers began to ripple through the crowd, shifting from scorn to cautious curiosity, Thomas felt the stirrings of something new awakening within him. He stepped forward slightly, feeling the cool evening air brush against his skin, amplifying the warmth blooming in his chest, a sense of purpose that had long eluded him. The weight of past regrets transformed into determination, and in that moment, he decided that he would stand beside Clara, not just in defense of her spirit, but in honor of the woman she had become. Together, they could challenge the world that had sought to define them by their scars. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the town in deep shades of purple and gold, a setting that mirrored the shift in Clara's life. She felt a swell of emotions crashing within her, a tide of vulnerability mingled with hope. The townsfolk began to exchange glances, their once mocking laughter replaced by tentative admiration, a flicker of understanding igniting in their eyes. Clara's heart raced, the possibility of acceptance unfurling like the very blooms she had cultivated in her garden. In that moment, she transformed not just in her own eyes, but in the eyes of those around her, a testament to the beauty of resilience, a promise of new beginnings. As the evening unfolded, Thomas took a step closer to Clara, his voice low and steady. "What you've done here today is more than just standing up for yourself. You've shown them the strength that lies beneath the surface." Clara turned to him, her pulse quickening as she felt the truth of his words resonate deep within her. The shadows that had once defined her seemed to evaporate, and with every glance exchanged between them, she felt the foundations of a bond solidifying, one that would weather whatever storms might linger on the horizon. The crowd began to disperse, the weight of silence replaced with murmurs of changed hearts. Clara and Thomas stood side by side, a new understanding painted across their features. In that moment of shared courage, they became not just the embodiment of survival, but a living testament to the beauty found in scars, the gentle hearts that beat beneath them, and the powerful stories that shaped their shared journey. It was a hopeful new beginning, one forged in the fires of resilience and illuminated by the light of acceptance, a promise that they would navigate this world together, hand in hand, forever transformed by the courage to embrace their truth.